impact. This is our second session. Last week, well, not the second session, but second session in this course. Last week we were talking about, we had Thea Snow, who was talking to us about weaker problems and complexity, which was actually really awesome. I really enjoyed that session. So if you haven't gotten a chance to check that out. It's on our YouTube channel. Today, we're really going to focus on visualizing complex systems. I think some people know a bit about complex systems. You know, I know Kyle and Bushan and Dawn know quite a bit about complex systems, but this time we'll really challenge you. And if you already know about complex systems, I want you to contribute as well and sort of, you know, challenge what I'm saying. So we'll start with this cool infographic. I see Kyle smiling. If he's smiling, that's a good point. That's a good thing. So I'm calling it the elephant in the room, and it's an Indian idiom, and basically it talks about how there's all these like blind people and they're all touching different parts of the elephants and trying to figure out what this thing is, right? They don't know it's an elephant. They're just touching different parts. And, you know, one person's like pulling onto the elephant's tail and saying it's a rope. One is like holding onto one of its legs and it's saying it's a tree, and so on and so forth. And this one, this idiom is often used to sort of describe systems thinking, right? Like each of us, you know, regardless of what the problem is, each of us has their own experience of a specific problem and a specific system, and it looks very different, right? So like if we're talking about, say, homelessness, it looks, the problem looks very different from, you know, from a person who's experiencing homelessness versus like a government official trying to help, or like a service provider offering assistance. And that's really sort of like the point of systems thinking, is that we're trying to sort of like understand the system by almost like zooming out and talking to lots of people to understand, you know, how do these like different points interact, basically. How do these different worldviews interact, basically to find out like that it's an elephant, right? Yeah, any questions about that sort of idiom? It's pretty popular in terms of system thinking, so you'll see it quite a bit. All right, no questions. I'm just letting. Okay, cool. So what we're going to focus on today is we're going to talk briefly about a complex system. We sort of covered that last week as well when we're talking about the difference between a complicated and complex system. We're going to talk about 3 ways to approach a problem. I think there's like heaps more ways, but I think that you can probably categorize them into 3 ways. And then we're going to talk about why visualize complex systems and then how to do that. And that will be, we'll sort of like give you a taster. It will be intense and that's okay, but I'm just sort of setting your expectations. All right, so Danella Meadows, she writes quite a bit about systems thinking. She says, a system is a set of related components, right? And those components, like say, for example, you know, say we're talking about like homelessness, you know, service providers and government and people experiencing homelessness, they're sort of parts of the system, right? And they, that system works together in a particular environment to perform whatever function is required to achieve the system's objectives. And one of the sort of like things that took me a while to actually understand about systems is that, first of all, you can't really design a complex system, right? It sort of like emerges as you add different things, right? Like no one organized the system of education. Sure, the government, you know, plays a role, but it doesn't control it. One of the things that took me quite a while is that systems act how they're designed to, right? Or how they're supposed to. You can't really talk about like system failure, right? Because if anything, the system's actually acting in its best interest, right? It's acting according to the rules that are, you know, set by different parties and how different parties engage with the system. Another sort of cool quote about a system is like Draper Kaufman. He likens a system to a cow. And he says that if you divide a cow in half, it doesn't give you like 2 smaller cows, right? You can end up with a lot of meat, right? But the essential nature of the cow, you know, a living system that's capable of turning grass into milk, is no longer there, right? Because you've killed the cow, you've divided it into half. And that's what we mean when we say the system functions as a whole, right? You can't just like take a specific organization out of a system and then expect it to behave how it, you know, behaves in the system. And if anything, the behavior of that organization or that person or that entity depends on the entire structure of the system, and not just, you know, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. And we'll sort of talk a bit about that as well. Any questions so far? We want these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to be like, dude, that doesn't make sense, or hold up, I don't understand this point. Any questions? Okay, well, the offer is always open, so please pause me if you need to. All right, so sort of when I was at uni, I was sort of introduced to the idea of systems thinking. That was like a while ago. I'm not that old, but it was a while ago. And I think a lot of so my background is in software engineering, and a lot of the thinking that I used to do was like analytical thinking, right? Like we get an assignment and it says, we want you to build this computer program that calculates this specific thing, or, this game. And then what you do is like you break it down to its like simplest components. You try to solve those components and then you add them together, right? That's like the 1 + 1 + 1 = 3 sort of approach. And then at uni, I was introduced to the first one, right, which is systems thinking, which is like zooming out and trying to understand how these entities interact in order to understand what's happening, right? And then when I started my career, I was introduced to design thinking, which is like really trying to understand people's experiences. And it's like almost like the zooming in part of it. So it's like, systems thinking is zoom out, design thinking is zooming into the human experience. And then analytical thinking is like, maybe we can understand it if we just break it down. The problem is analytical thinking isn't actually that helpful when it comes to systems. And it's not that it's not at all helpful. It is helpful, especially for like technical problems, but it's not so helpful for complex problems. And today we'll be focused on systems thinking, but throughout you'll hear references to design thinking and human-centered design and things like that. All right, cool. So first question, it's on the Miro board as well, so we'll split into groups. What are the advantages and disadvantages that you see with a systems thinking approach? So I'm going to put you into 3 groups to do this exercise. All right, cool. So the rooms are open. You should be having a message now. And we'll give you 5 minutes to sort of reflect on that and come back and share your thoughts. Awesome. Oh, we got more cameras now than we did before. That's awesome. Awesome. Did anyone have any sort of reflections on the exercise, sort of like patterns almost that you saw or insights that you got as you discussed it with your group? Hung, go ahead.
So I was in group 3 with Kyle and Sachi. We were discussing about Vanish, how system thinking is a modular system. We're able to see the skeletal system, basically see the big image, and inside the big image we see each components that make it up. And what we discussed further is that by understanding how each component have a role affecting the big image, we can make changes, which adds to the modular system. The disadvantage that we discussed about is that it can get very, it can be costly, time consuming, and in the U.S. in North America, we kind of have a bureaucracy thing. If the system works, we won't really make an effort to change it as much as the saying goes. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess the question is like, if it's not broken for who, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's almost like, people whose voices aren't very loud typically. It's like if no one talks about it, then just won't get fixed. If it's not made a big issue, like if it's not like an electoral issue, right? It's like something that could, make or break someone's re-election. It's like, well, yeah, why focus on it? Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Who else?
I think also, along with maybe what you're saying is at least their perception of uh, who the system's thinking benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Again, maybe that's similar to what you were saying. So maybe we can think that maybe there's some positivity coming from the system because, of course, we're benefiting from it. So it gets back to what you were saying before about the elephant in terms of looking at it from different perspectives.
Mm.
But yeah, it could be an elephant. I mean, it could truly be an elephant or whatever it is, but you're looking at it in such a way. Once again, going back to my original point, based on what you're getting out of it, at
Yeah.
least at least for that time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why it's really important to have diverse perspectives, right? Because everyone's experience will be different. Some people will be benefiting, other people won't necessarily be, and other people just like it won't affect them, right? So that's why it's really important to sort of have diverse perspectives, not just like, have like one group just doing the exercises. Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to the next thing, which is mindsets or mindset shifts of a systems thinker. And this comes from Disrupt Design. You can check it out. They've got a sort of cool blog and stuff. But basically, it's like, there's almost like 6 mindset shifts. And I want to get your thoughts as well on what else you think is needed. But sort of like, thinking of things in like as disconnected, right? Like the government's disconnected from the people, and that's disconnected from like the services, to seeing the interconnection, right? And seeing like how do they operate and how do they influence each other. Sort of from linear thinking in terms of like, you put an input and at the end of the process you get an output, to more like, how does the outcome here affect the inputs, right? And how does that affect other parts of the system? And then silos, which is, a problem that you hear all the time in big organizations, like we're working on silos, to actually understanding that some behaviors of the system just emerge, right? It's not necessarily that you can tell that they're going to emerge. And that's why we talk about fail-safe experiments when it comes to systems thinking, because of that sort of property of emergence, right? Like it's something that emerges out of the whole system, sort of like the cow, what emerges is milk. If the first time you see a cow eating grass, you're not going to be like, oh, I know what she's going to produce or what he's going to produce. She, I'm not sure what it is going to produce. The fourth one there is like thinking instead of thinking in parts, you think in wholes, right? Like how does everything connect together? And again, that's related to like disconnection and interconnectedness. Analysis versus synthesis, which is something that we spoke about in our last course in terms of like in terms of design research. But here in systems thinking, it's like, how does this organization or entity or actor or agent or person or community fit into the whole picture, right? Rather than just like looking at this thing again in silos. And then instead of looking at things in isolation, actually trying to understand the relationships between different things in the system. So here's the next exercise. I guess I wanted to have a sort of like a discussion about like what other mindsets do you think, we typically think of, and then what do we need to shift to in order to sort of like be better at systems thinking?
So I've got a couple ideas, but I want to press on one of these first, because that linear to circular to me is just circular being linear by another name. And I see people put loops in their like experience maps and that sort of stuff and call it non-linear, but it's still extremely linear. The best way that I've heard this described is there's in the Greek language, there's two words for time. There's chronos, which is linear time as we know it and pass through it, and there's kairos, which is the time of opportunity. And the way I would compare that is, rather than thinking in terms of chronos, to move to kairos. And so it's more like almost like a random watch, where you're thinking about when things connect and when things fire, how do they actually merge? And so it becomes less of a circle and more of this amorphous cloud sort of thing.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Bringing some Greek into this group. I like it.
I've got all the words for everything.
Awesome. Terence?
Yeah, I'm thinking of more psychology on the thinker, in terms of the thinking or mental processes that go involved as a reaction to the system, or into the system, how the system is. Yeah, just that whole process. What that involves, what that looks like, what it does, as opposed to looking at the system and talking about the system, thinking about or talking about the reaction to the system.
So is that the reaction of like people's reactions to the system?
Huh?
Oh, I was saying, is that when you say reaction to the system, do you mean people's reaction to the system?
Yeah, and then how that affects decisions.
Oh yeah.
So in other words, as opposed to just looking at the system, looking at the reaction to it, and then thereby the decisions that result from there.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting actually, because it's almost like like say people feel like this issue is like really unfair, right? So they react, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Terence. So they react by protesting, right? Then sort of like other agents in the system can choose, like, do we want to sort of like, kill these protests? Kind of like in Egypt, right? When they wanted to get rid of Mubarak, like the first approach was just like stop the protests, right? And then the second approach was like, okay, like maybe it's time for Mubarak to let go. We'll sort of like let him step off, but maybe we'll give him some influence, right? So it's almost like, the system has like this choice, and it's not like really a choice that one person makes. It's almost like it has to be like a mental model, or like something that the system or people in the system believe is the right thing to do for them to actually sort of take that action. That's really interesting, Terence. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. So briefly, why visualize complex systems? And I think you all touched on it. I heard Fazad, I think you're talking about like creating a shared narrative of what's happening and why. And that's really cool. And that's really important, both because like, systems thinking, like, yeah, it's a great tool, but you're not going to like want everyone in the world, and not everyone in the world is going to be like, yeah, I really need to understand systems thinking, right? So you need to create something that's like understandable and really like shareable with other people, and be able to test that with them, right? So that's why we sort of like create a story, right? So we can share that and test that story with other people who are involved in the system. The other thing is that it helps us reframe the problems. The problem that, we're often like given, like if you're working for a consultancy or something, or even if you pick like an issue like homelessness, right? You really need to understand like what's the issue you're trying to fix here, right? What's the problem you're trying to fix? And it's really difficult to do that without sort of like looking at the system as a whole, right? Otherwise, you might just be, trying to fix symptoms instead of trying to reframe the problem and really understand it. The third thing is identifying intervention points, which I think Stanford D School, it's called something lab, social innovation lab, I think, refers to like system acupuncture. And it's almost like you need to identify like the trigger points in the system or the levers in the system that you can pull or push in order to sort of, get the system to behave in a specific way. And then the last thing, which I think is like probably the most important thing, it's like visualizing complex system hopefully gives us the confidence to act, right? And acting in a complex system is the only way to really learn because of its properties. All right, cool. So here's a question which I was sort of thinking of as I was preparing for this session. Why not model the system in its entirety? Okay, so we'll go back into groups again for 3 minutes, let's say. And you've got a mirror board as well. So if you don't have access, send me a message and I'll set you up.
Hey, Abram, could you go to the previous slide?
Yeah. Do you want me to paste it in Miro?
Yeah.
Why not? I'll do it for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
No. Itzel, would you mind sharing once the groups are back? Is that all good? I can't hear you.
I have the.
Oh yeah, now it's working. Awesome. All right. Thanks for coming back. All right, Itzel, do you want to go? All right, go ahead. What do you think? Why not map the system in its entirety?
Saying is that.
Oh, sorry, keep going. Yeah, your audio's on.
Saying is that we came up with this kind of like analogy of like how can we map the ocean? It will be like impossible. Well, very complex. So maybe just started with a pool, and kind of like and also because time influences all of this. It's very dynamic. So maybe we're gonna have a snapshot of the problem, maybe like in a minute, a day, and then time eventually is gonna change it. So I think that is also a reason why not to kind of not model the system entirely, because time, it will influence that.
No, that's cool. That reminds me of an Arabic proverb that talks about like when people try to boil the ocean, it's like you can't boil the ocean, dude. Like, just can't do it. Cool, awesome. So Shin, I feel like you have some thoughts to share about this question. I feel like
No, I just was learning from Wang and Kyle. Essentially, I think we came to understanding that if you model the system as entirety, you would need eternity because you'll keep on uncovering more and more, and it has to have a time bound or some kind of governing constraint.
Kyle is just like governing
on it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a never-ending loop.
Yeah, that's a really interesting reflection. I really like that. I think, and the other thing as well, like sort of related to that point, is that the system is constantly evolving, right? So like, great, you mapped it today, but it's going to go out of date like tomorrow. So that's, it's like really difficult. And also some more sort of thoughts. It's like, it's not actually that helpful. It's like the point of mapping a system is to take action, right? And like, I think a lot of some of the groups said, like, it's a lot of work for not much benefit. Well, it's a whole lot of work. Like, it's too much work. The other thing that I found interesting is that it creates like the illusion of understanding and control, right? It creates the illusion that like, if only we can understand the system, then we will definitely know what the answer is to solve this problem. And it's like, that's not really systems thinking. That's not like how we solve complex problems. That's how we, like simulation and system simulation and stuff like that is interesting and helpful, but not for systems thinking, right? Not for problems like homelessness or poverty or unemployment. This is a systems map that I saw. I was like looking at like unhelpful examples of system maps, and then I like kept clicking links, and then got to this quote, right? And it was like this General McChrystal, when he saw this map, is like, when we understand that slide, we'll have won the war, right? It's like, yeah, it's great. You spent a lot of time on it, but it doesn't really tell me much. I can't really sort of like use that to take action. Awesome, which I thought was pretty funny and true.
Yeah, to add context to that, so 10 years into the war in Afghanistan, the Pentagon released this to the New York Times and said, don't worry, we figured it out, we have a strategy. And the New York Times posted this, and basically this almost became a meme afterwards. Like, this is what they decided is going to be what we're going to read. Like, this is supposed to be reassuring to us. We can't even read it.
That's funny. I didn't know that extra background, but you've read lots of systems books, so you would know. All right, so here's the next topic. So I want you to pick out a topic out of mental health, journalism, food waste, or if you if you're passionate about any other topic, just pick that as a team. And write down everything that you believe is related to this problem, right? So we've got like the circles. That's what we want you to start with, which is like, there's a big circle in the middle and that's like your topic. And then there's like small circles around it, which everything you think is related. And then once you've sort of like exhausted that, and it might take you like, 10 or 15 minutes, then start drawing connections between the different elements that you've mapped. Okay, so I'll give you 15 minutes for that exercise, and then I'll check in, and if teams need more time, we will give you more time. Any questions before we go into groups?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, could you show us just how to get started with Miro? Because where are the circles, where are the lines, where are how do we position that stuff?
Thanks.
I haven't used it before.
I really appreciate it. All right, let me just share. Okay. All right, so can everyone see this?
Yeah.
All right, maybe we'll do this as a group, okay? We'll just copy something. And then let's say we want to map food in the fridge, okay? Start with something simple and probably not very helpful. Okay, so this is like the food in the fridge. So that's our topic. So I've made it bold and it's in the middle. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Cool, awesome. So what do people think? Like, what are related elements to food in the fridge?
What is our what's our Zoom?
Sorry?
What's our Zoom? Are we talking about like condiments, or are we talking about, let's call out mayo and ketchup and?
No. So like, I'll change it. Good question. So I'll change it to amount of food in the fridge. Okay. So like, what dictates the amount of food in the fridge? Yeah, does that make sense? So for example, I'll start with two. One is like people at home, right? Like
diet.
People at home. Sorry, Sachin, go. Diet. Yeah.
Advertisement.
Oh yeah.
Size of the fridge.
Oh yeah.
Store locations.
Yeah. Keep going. I'm a quick typer.
Family size.
Yeah.
Last time someone went grocery shopping.
Last time we went grocery shopping.
Income.
Sorry? I would say as well whether we're having we've invited anyone over, like party.
Size of the refrigerator. Oh, that's already captured.
What's the like Blue Apron? What would that be considered?
Sorry?
Have you heard of a service called Blue Aprons? Like, it's like a subscription, that they deliver ingredients to cook. I forgot what the term was called of the kind of service.
I'm just gonna call it way we get groceries, right? Because if if you go get
prep
it
food.
First, sorry, go.
Prep for you food.
Hmm?
Prep for you. It's basically prep for you food industry.
Yeah. Terrence, what were you gonna say?
Well, initially I was thinking of present day COVID, you know, but along with that, I'm thinking economics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, income.
Yeah, income, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor. Okay, cool. All right, so we'll stop there. Not that we finished, but this is just to help you sort of understand. All right, so what do you think is related here to different things? So for example, I would connect advertisements with diets, and also I would connect advertisements with the way we get groceries, right? So like, if they're like advertising keto diet on TV, then maybe we start going to a keto diet, or if they're advertising Blue Apron or something else, then yeah.
Household income with family size.
Oh yeah, so interesting.
Advertisement with size of the fridge.
Yeah.
Store locations with the way we get groceries.
Mm-hmm.
Store locations also the last time we went grocery.
Yeah.
Yep.
family size and people at home.
Family size and people at home. Cool. Sorry, I'm just trying to clean it up.
Party or not and diet.
Sorry?
Party or not and diet. Yeah. The more you party, the more you're going to eat or not eat.
Yeah. Very true.
I don't know if family size and household income might be related or not. That's doubtable.
Yeah, I mean, maybe number of adults and household income.
Yeah, yeah. I think in some cases, you get some benefits if you have a certain size of family.
Oh yeah, like government benefits and stuff. That's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably not in China though. Probably not in China.
Not in China, but we haven't decided on the location. So
yeah, that's true. Pia, I thought you were going to say something. I heard your voice. No.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, okay. No worries.
I think your household income could affect your diet in terms of you have more money, you can afford to buy more vegetables and fruit and healthy food, at least in this country.
I know. Good food is expensive. I just hate that idea.
Yeah.
And fast food is like super convenient.
Household income would impact whether you had parties or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Good one.
Okay. All right. I think we're going to stop there, but you get one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that helpful as a sort of like a primer in terms of how you would map the amount of food in the fridge?
Okay. How do you copy a circle?
Oh, so just Control C, Control V, or you can this thing, or you just press S, either or, and then you just select circle and you press like that, and you got a circle. Same thing with the Post-it note. You just select the color you want. Same thing if you just want to add text. Same thing if you want to add a line. So a line, I'll show you how to do a line because that might be a bit confusing. So you just put a line anywhere, right? It gets you to like put the 2 points, and then you connect it just by sort of like anchoring it to one of these blue dots.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Hey, Ron, got a question.
Yeah.
You actually got so many connections. When do you stop, or when do you know to stop?
Yeah, cool. I would say you guys are asking a difficult question. I would say
15 minutes.
Sorry, 15 minutes. Yeah. For this exercise, 15 minutes. But in reality, what you do is like you would.
About in reality.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about in reality.
Yeah. I would say probably when you've exhausted, like the minds of the people working on it. But at the same time, right, it's not like that map doesn't change anymore. It's not like once you create that map, that's it. It doesn't change. What we usually do is like we then take out that map and test it with, say, other people in the system, right? Because again, you don't want like a bunch of designers or consultants or whatever, or government officials or community members. You don't want, like, you want diversity, right? So whoever is creating the map, that group needs to be diverse, but you also need to go out and take it and sort of share the map or share the narrative that you're creating out of the map, if that makes sense. And based on that, you'll change connections, you'll add elements, you would change your narrative. So yeah, it's not a static thing that you just create once. And
yeah, well, I was about to say that. Yeah,
this example isn't finished yet because there are some entities without links. Like last time we went grocery shopping and way we get groceries, they don't link to anything.
Yeah.
So we need to ensure that all the links are there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Bishan, were you going to say something before we go into group?
Yeah, I was just pointing out to the fact that some of this could also be our assumptions, which we just need to go to the market and validate it. And you would see that some of these circles or some of these connections may not exist in the real world. So you draw these hypotheses and then you go out to the market and you test your assumptions, and based on that you add and you remove So this systems map is never final. It's always in a draft mode. It's always work in progress until you have a certain intervention point through which you want to continue forward.
Yeah.
But at the same time, wouldn't or couldn't that negate certain realities?
For example?
What do you mean?
If you were to do that, I mean, you said like you do certain research. I mean, that may contradict with certain realities that one has certain connections drawn. You know, it just seems like that's kind of subjective in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely, Terence. And that's sort of like, that's why we spoke about the elephants, right? It's like you're trying to sort of like, not that you're trying to create objective reality or map reality as it is, because like we said, if you try to map the reality, it will take you a very long time and it won't be that helpful. But what you are trying to do is understand the system from people's different perspectives and sort of like put it on a piece of paper to say, this is, you know, what people see or how people are experiencing the system.
Actually, that's a really good point. There's this was usually an action like trigger for me. What I would do when we were working on location is I would put these maps on giant whiteboards that we'd have in our open workspace, and as people were walking by, I would have them take a look and put up post-its to adjust or amend where they thought they needed to, and so it was constantly in a work in progress. But when I found contradictions, that was something that needed to be researched further. And that was usually like, great, we're going to dive into that, because if I've got a space of conflict, then that means like there's something interesting in there. I've got a couple different forces that are convinced that reality is different in this one space. Yeah. I definitely want to know more.
Yeah, and those sort of like tension points, I like what Kyle is saying. Like those are the ones that you want to research and sort of like understand a bit more, right? Like some people agree on, like, you'll talk to 100 people and they'll agree on the same thing, but there will be like two things that they really disagree on, and they fundamentally see the system in a different way, and you want to understand why that is, right? And the way to resolve that isn't necessarily you just like pick one group's opinion. You actually try to resolve it by understanding what's happening underneath. And we'll talk about the idea of the iceberg model as well.
Or sometimes there could be a problem or issue with the premise or the questions, templates, or designs itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, we spoke about in the last course, we spoke about reflexivity as like a way to sort of like make sure that you're, understanding the biases that you're bringing to the project and things like that. But absolutely, sometimes you'll have to go back to the drawing board with your questions and be like, actually, that question is, biasing us toward a specific direction. All right, we got 25 minutes left. So I'll give you 15 minutes for this session. Again, pick a topic, map the related elements that you see, whether it's organizations or people, or actors or agents or whatever. And then map the connections. One tip when you're doing this, feel free to work individually to start off with and then discuss, rather than trying to reach consensus. Everyone's maps are crazy. Awesome. Thanks for coming back. So yeah, I wanted to get some insights or stories that emerged from your exercises as a team. I think, what did we do? We did remote work and food waste and mental health. So it would be good to hear from each of the teams. Dawn, I'll pick on you.
Okay. You just want me to just talk about some of the things we wrote on here?
Yeah, and how it was sort of, mapping with food waste, what that was like for you.
Well, some of the things that came to mind was just for myself, I just was thinking about what causes us to waste food. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's changed probably in the last 30 years or so is that our portion sizes have gotten large, and we've gotten into this, at least I'm talking about the US, mm-hmm. We've gotten into this mentality of buying in bulk, like going to Costco and getting enormous amounts of food because, we'll never be able to go to the store again. So we buy a lot of food that we then end up, especially if we get fresh food, it goes bad before you can even get to it. Even if you maybe have several family members, you're probably not storing it, which was another point, is, not knowing how to store the vegetables and the fruit properly so that they don't go bad as quickly. There are some other great points on here about having unscheduled travel away from home. So you're not expecting to be gone. So you've bought all this food and then it's left in your fridge, but you're not there. And then you come back and of course it's bad. So you have to throw it out. Mm-hmm. So like lack of planning, overproduction, food that doesn't look as pretty. So maybe you don't buy it and it just sits there on the grocery store shelves and they throw it out. Yeah. And then one thing, I'll let somebody else from the team speak, but one other thing for me was, I know in the past when I volunteered like at food pantries, they can't take everything that people want to offer them. They have their own set of guidelines as far as the kind of food they can accept. So even though you might be a restaurant or some other place that wants to give food, they may not be able to get it from you. Yeah. For various, because of health codes or something. Yeah. So that also, leads to some waste. Anybody else from the team wants to share their thoughts?
All right, I'll take that as a no.
Maybe not.
So what were you going to say? You go.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say was we took the amount of food in the fridge would have an impact on it, which is something we explored in another map. So in order to link maps together, I took that.
That's cool. That's a cool insight in terms of, and it's probably something that Blue Apron or services like that is like probably good for. It's like just giving you the food that you need to cook the meals. What were we gonna say?
You're muted.
We can't hear you for some reason. All right, give you 1 minute. I'm a lip reader now. No. All right, we'll come back to you. We'll go to someone else and come back to you. Feel free to sort out your audio while you can just like interject. Okay, cool. All right, Hung or Farzad, did you want to share anything? Or Bhushan or Pia or Sachin or Terence?
I can talk a little bit. I'm as far as I'm talking. Hi everyone. Yeah, we did mental health. I thought it was good. It was fairly generative. We kind of talked about sources and effects. I'm not sure if that was a bit premature, if we were supposed to categorize or list things and then figure that out. But it sort of helped us it did also give us some sort of anchor to sort of think about the thing with. So I didn't find it overly convoluting. Yeah, I mean, I think it came out fairly easily. Like, I'm not sure if we have all the relationships perfectly like mapped out.
Yeah.
So we're just going for like a first pass kind of experience. So I'm curious to know what we do with something like once we've sort of made it this far.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. I would say, so this is probably like the first sort of like step in a system map in terms of like writing everything that you can think of, and then sort of like adding some structure to it. So some people will talk about like different models, like we'll talk about the iceberg and things like that. So hopefully that answers your question. Cool. Anyone else want to share their thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. So we did remote work, and I think what was nice about that was we've all got experience with it, so it was easy to contextualize. We weren't spending a lot of time hypothesizing what it might look like, so it was close to home. Also, even though we were what seems like it was going to be a small thing, we were just connecting and just dropping bubbles all over the place. So even starting on a small scale, the system that's involved in that is massive. We could have gone on for days about everything that's involved. One of the insights that I think came from what we gathered just in those couple minutes was how many elements were related to home more so than work itself. And that isn't too surprising, but we were definitely much more focused on the home stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it speaks to like system boundaries, and we haven't really covered it, but we can talk about it in the next session, which is sort of like deciding, okay, like there has to be like some sort of scope where you're like, okay, even though homelessness might be related to remote work, we just, for our purposes, we won't consider it, for example. And it sort of like comes together, like you need to make the decision as a team to sort of say, okay, we're going to consider everything within this specific boundary and we won't consider anything outside. But at the same time, that boundary as well changes over time, or it could change over time. All right, cool. So to close off, sort of Farzad, what you were referring to, there is a few different, once you've like done this dump of like all the elements that you think are related, you can sort of go a few different ways. These are just some of the ways, but you can look online for more types. There's like value chain, which I think is probably similar to what Farzad's and Bhushan's team did in terms of like what are the sources and what are the outputs. But you can also go to something like the iceberg model, which is basically talks about like the events that you see happening and then sort of gets you to dig deeper in terms of why these events are happening. What are the patterns, but also what are the underlying structures that you're seeing in the system, and eventually what are the mental models for people, right? Like, one mental model or one thing might be like, society believes that people who are homeless are not good at finding jobs, or, things like that. And then the second one is causal loop diagrams, which is basically trying to understand like what are the balancing, loops within a system and what are the reinforcing loops. So balancing is like, say for example, balancing actually is a good example. Say you open the water in the shower, right? If you have the drain open, that's balancing, right? Because you have water coming in, but you also have water going out. Whereas reinforcing is like, the water is in the shower and the drain's clogged or something, and I'm adding water, right? So like as time goes on, there's more water in the shower. And then the third one is behavior over time, which is like you try to understand different behaviors of different actors or different elements in the system and how that actually happens over time. but we'll talk more about that. So in your teams, have a think about like which diagram you think might make most sense for you, and then in your coaching clinics, we'll talk to you about that. Awesome. So just to close off today's session, we want to hear some reflections and key takeaways from people. It would be awesome to hear from everyone, but I think like Hung's room's super noisy, so that's okay if you can't share, but it would be good to hear something from everyone.
I'll go. So I really think we should have done the causal loop. Because I think relationships make more meaningful conversations when you debate what's good and bad and what's the pushing factor and the pulling factor and what's influencing each of these moving parts. So I think that was one aspect of today's session that I really missed. I think we covered that when we first did systems thinking about last year. I don't remember when. That I thought was a very interesting exercise. And I think from the three tools that you showed us, the iceberg and the rest of the two, I thought causal loop would be much more relative to what we were doing today with mental health.
Awesome. That's good. And I think, our activity today was like sort of mapping, just dumping, and then sort of creating that structure around that using causal loop. So that will be the next step. Thanks, Bashan. Awesome. Anyone else want to share? Itzel, did you get your mic working?
I think so. Can you hear me? Okay. No, I mean, just what I wanted to share about our exercise was that it was just like one complex problem as a food waste, and I couldn't identify like behaviors of people, and then also kind of like that it goes into like the social systems, and then the kind of like the industrial systems, and then the ecological. So that it's just one problem, but it's connected to all of these different systems as well. So that is what it was super interesting for me, kind of like to see it right here. And I mean, for my first time being here, I really enjoy it, the activities, and kind of like to hear what other people share, the different opinions, and this is a great course. Thank you so much.
It's good to have you. So I reckon reach out to David Sivier. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correct. He's on our Slack, and he's actually got an organization that's working on the problem of food waste. So he collects food from like all the restaurants around his local area, and makes it compost and stuff. Anyway, check him out. Cool guy.
That's great.
Awesome. Who else? Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess one big takeaway you could say that I came away with thinking about was going back to the picture of the elephant in the room, and just what prevents looking at different views or moving around to see them.
That's really interesting. That's super interesting, because that almost like brings in the empathy, right? Like if we could really stand in people's shoes, right, then you could just like, just move around and experience the what that experience is like. I guess the challenge is like, say for a problem like homelessness, it'll be very difficult for me to like become homeless, right? Because even if I like become homeless for a week, kind of like the rough sleep out nights, right? It's like, yeah, that's great. You're doing it for a great cause, but it's like, that the next night you're going to be home in your warm bed with your TV on and, the lights on and stuff. So it's like, it's a bit difficult to like live someone else's reality in a way. But that's a really good point about like the importance of empathy, not empathy.
Well, I guess I'm also saying that being stagnant, even though you may not think it's stagnation, but not moving is self-hurtful, while it may not be viewed that way. So looking at it from a healthy perspective, it's very healthy to move around.
Yeah.
I think if you go to the original Indian proverb, it's really a story about understanding, more so just listening to others. And not necessarily needing to transition to be able to see things holistically, not having that expectation. But we bring so much independent context. We have to assume that everybody else in the system brings that same independent context, that it's important to respect that independent context from everybody else in the system, essentially.
I have a couple of questions.
I'd like to, I want to just sort of quickly add, I think the point that Terrence is making is worth considering. I think even though we may not be able to experience things fully, I think my own life has taught me that you always understand things radically different if it's in your head versus you've experienced it. So fundamentally, like, my opinion is, if you think you want to solve homelessness issues and you get into a position to do that, if you don't go through the experience of it, you're never going to see it in the way that you could potentially, in order to it really helps you dial up and dial down some of the factors, even though it may not be perfect. It's certainly better than a mental exercise. And something to that, I just want to say, I did like the course. I appreciate like what you were doing here. I think for me, systems thinking has always sounded good in theory, but has sort of failed in practice. And I'd like to see people play with it more until we can actually make it sort of like actually like do something, as opposed to just like talk about doing things. So thanks for doing this, and I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. It's good to have you. Our next course is actually going to be sort of like taking action, right? It's like actual prototyping of your ideas, depending on the systems thinking. So hopefully, if you join us for that, it will be you'll hopefully see that in action. Cool, awesome, Jeff. I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Is there a piece of software for doing causal loop diagrams that you've used that you like?
There's a couple. I think there's one called Kumi. To be honest, I prefer pen and paper, but that's a bit difficult now that we're all working virtually. But there's a tool called Loopy and a tool called Kumi. I'll share them on our Slack channel in case people are interested to sort of play around and use them.
How do I find your Slack channel?
I will give you the link.
Okay, thanks. And also, I'm interested in the reference or more information on the iceberg model. I've not seen that before. That's really interesting.
Awesome. I will post that on the Slack channel as well. Then.
Okay, thanks a lot.
I'm just mindful that if I post it on Zoom, once you close it, you'll lose the link. So I'll post it on Slack channel, and yeah, you'll find it there.
Will you post the Slack channel in the chat?
Yeah.
There it is. Okay, there it is. Super. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much for showing up again. It was great to have you, and good to have a few new faces as well. Looking forward to learning more about you and seeing how you contribute. And yeah, see you next week or on Slack.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Abram.
Thanks, Abram.
Thanks, Abram. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sachin.